Hopefully he will join us in a few minutes. All right, well, with that, I'd like to welcome everybody to a special meeting of the Board of Selectmen for Tuesday, May 31st, 2022. Please all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Back up there. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, with that, Lauren, do we have any citizens' comments this morning?
Susan Glantz has her hand raised.
Okay.
Susan, you can unmute.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, good morning.
Okay. I guess I don't have a video, but that's fine. I know you're going to consider the proclamation against as declaring June 2nd Gun Violence Awareness Day. And I just wanted to say just a couple of words, and I believe that there are two other people that wanted to speak also. I think they're present on Zoom. I would encourage them to raise their hands so that Lauren can find them. So on January 21st, 2013, Hadia Pendleton marched in President Obama's second inaugural parade. 1 week later, Hadia was shot and killed on a playground in Chicago. Soon after this tragedy, Hadia's childhood friends decided to commemorate her life by wearing orange, the color hunters wear in the woods to protect themselves and others. So Wear Orange began on June 2nd, 2015, what would have been Hadia's 18th birthday. Since then, Wear Orange has been expanded by several different supporting national groups, expanded to a period of 3 days each year. Some people celebrate it, I shouldn't say celebrate, some people acknowledge it on the first Friday of June or the first weekend of June. I believe Guilford is planning to do that on this weekend. So orange has become the defining color of the gun violence prevention movement nationally. The color orange honors more than 110 lives cut short and the hundreds more wounded by gun violence every day. In 2021, more than 1,000 partner organizations, influencers, corporate brands, elected officials, and landmarks join hundreds of thousands of Americans to unite around a call to end gun violence. So Wear Orange is in its 8th year this year, and I encourage the board to select June 2nd as the day to honor the people who have been killed by gun violence. And the following Connecticut towns so far have or will issue proclamations: Bethel, Fairfield, Greenwich, Hamden, Norwalk, Ridgefield, Salisbury, Stamford, Trumbull, West Hartford, and Weston. And I did forward you all by email a list of 20 people in Madison that I was able to accumulate in short notice in support of this proclamation, which I hope you will vote for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Welcome, Scott. We're in public comment right now. And I think we had another hand raised, Lauren?
Yep, Nancy Leckerling.
Okay. State your name and address, Nancy.
Good morning. Can you
Good
hear
morning.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. I'm Reverend Nancy Leckerling of 19 Grove Avenue, and I am thankful to be able to speak this morning. Thank you for Selectman Lyons and Selectman Wilson, Kokoruda, Murphy, and Goldberg. I'm speaking in favor of a proposed proclamation to make June 2nd Gun Violence Awareness Day in Madison. 6 years ago, my husband John and I drove to Morris, Connecticut to hear our U.S. Senator Chris Murphy speak. It was our first time to hear him in person, and we were duly impressed. My main takeaway that day was Senator Murphy saying if we wanted to get anything done justice-wise in the next few years, it was going to have to be accomplished at the state or local levels. Fortunately, our Connecticut legislators have made progress in passing common sense gun legislation since then. And Senator Murphy has been the leader for years in the US Senate of a bipartisan group of senators trying to establish a more comprehensive federal background check system. And that's a reform supported by 88% of Americans. But after this horrific 2 weeks of two mass shootings, one in East Buffalo and one in Uvalde, Texas, we've learned of staggering statistics. Guns are now the leading cause of death of children ages 1 to 19 in the United States. 1,500 people have been killed in more than 270 mass shootings since 2009. 1,517,000 people since 1968 have died from guns on American soil. There have been 213 mass shootings in the United States just in the first 21 weeks of 2022. 30% of adults in America say they own a gun. Gun violence in the US kills an average of 168 people every 2 days. And every day, more than 50,000 gun sales are recorded in the US. Currently, as Senator Murphy prophetically predicted, the only glimmers of hope have been at the state level in places like New York and Connecticut and a few other states. But we now have a looming Supreme Court looking to strike down New York's law that requires a permit to carry a concealed weapon. Gun violence is a public health crisis in our country, and many of us have little hope in our political culture. But I feel we need to resist this hopelessness tendency. I personally have seen, along with Susan, how public engagement of local citizenry can help pass laws, such as the town ban on fracking waste and one on single-use plastic bags. These are laws which motivated our state legislature to pass similar laws. The prospects for policy change about our gun laws may seem dim right now, and the prospect of cultural change even dimmer, but they entirely cease to exist unless you and I keep imagining a country where this kind of gun violence doesn't happen, and imagining the actions we can take at a local and state level to slowly, over days, weeks, months, and years, to make that country we imagine ours. I urge you to proclaim June 2nd Gun Violence Awareness Day in Madison so our townspeople will be aware of these gun-related statistics, and so Madison can join with concerned citizens throughout Connecticut and across our nation who will be wearing orange and participating in the 8th Annual National Gun Violence Awareness Day, June 2nd. A rally will be held at 6 p.m. that evening on the New Haven Green, but it's my hope that in Madison one day, we'll have our own rally on our green. Thanks for listening and your time devoted to this important cause.
Thank you very much for your comments, Nancy. Can I just ask a quick question? You mentioned, is Madison having a rally on the green June 2nd, or you just commenting that you would,
It's
Little
my,
confused.
I said it in the end, it's my hope that Madison one day.
oh,
will have
okay, okay,
Our own rally on the green.
okay, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much for your comments. Any other public comment?
Fran Brady is next.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Fran Brady. I reside at 108 Genesee Lane. Like we do most years, yesterday morning, my wife and I made the short journey from North Madison down to the railroad parking lot. We stood in the middle of the street in front of the firehouse to watch the quintessential small town event called a Memorial Day parade. Sure, it's nothing large or fancy, but it's what we do here in Madison every year. Local town folk lined the post road to clap and cheer as proud representatives of all branches of the armed forces with local veterans march past to remind us of the sacrifices made for us and our country. Then the high school marching band went by, and finally the fire trucks and first responders. Sure, there is the occasional Miss Connecticut or a gaggle of town politicians amongst the parade walkers, but all received our cheers and nonpartisan support on this bright day in May. As we finished our clapping, we looked up to see a final group of 6 or 7, with 3 carrying a 10-foot long homemade banner with dozens of balloons with the words that seemed to jump out at me. The words were a protest. They included anti-vaccine, anti-mandate slogans. I was almost too stunned to process it completely, even as one of their walkers came up over to me to spout her beliefs at us from less than 6 feet away. Walking back to the car, I began to think, what had just happened at our small town Memorial Day parade? My question to the Board of Selectmen is this: can we not find a way to keep this tradition sacred next year? Can we not find a way to protect it from exploitation? Can we keep our small town traditions free of distractions of the selfish and preserve the memory of the selfless? Thanks.
Thank you for your comments, Fran. Any other public comment, Lauren?
Joan Walker has her hand raised.
First of all, I want to thank you all for considering this proclamation. And I want to echo Franz Brady's comments. It was my uncle gave his life in World War II. I always have a specific Memorial Day tradition that I follow, and thinking about him and his sacrifices, and the fact that this wonderful parade, which honors those who have served and gives the ultimate sacrifice, it was just a horrific thing for them to do. On the next topic of gun violence, I want everybody, there was a post this morning from Kristen and Mike Strong that there is Ethan's Law is going to be brought forth at the federal level, and hopefully movement will happen there. And I urge everyone to contact their local legislators in other states to help have this, this really reasonable gun safety law put into national effect. And thank you all for what you're doing and for your service to this community.
Thank you. Lauren, any other public comment? Okay, asking again, no? All right, well, thank you very much for everybody getting up 8:30 after a holiday weekend to join us this morning. So we'll move on to the next item of business. Item number 3 is discuss and take action to declare June, and I'm going to amend this to June 3rd, 2022. And we can talk about this in our discussion, Gun Violence Awareness Day in Madison, Connecticut.
So moved.
Al, second. Okay. All right, great. So I do have a proclamation. There was a little bit of confusion on the dates because they're traditionally, I know that the Hadia's birthday was June 2nd. And so that was kind of recognized as a Wear Orange Day, but then I understand the national group has now adopted the last Friday. So the board back and forth a little bit had talked about this with some members. And so we're actually going to make June 3rd, which I think what our neighboring community is doing also, Friday, June 3rd. So that's been amended in the proclamation. And what I thought I could do is read the proclamation and then we can have a discussion. All right, whereas in Connecticut, and get comfortable, get your coffee. Whereas in Connecticut during 2021, there were 238 gun-related deaths, the highest toll in more than a decade. And in 2020, gun-related injuries were the leading cause of death among children and teens in the United States. And whereas guns are the second leading method of suicide in Connecticut, and gun-related suicides account for half of all Connecticut gun deaths. And whereas some 1 million students ages 12 to 18 report having access to a loaded gun without adult permission, and nearly 5 million children live in homes with unlocked loaded guns. And whereas more than 80% of child gun-related suicides use a gun belonging to a family member, and 2/3 of school shooters obtain the gun they use from their home or the home of a relative. And whereas beyond the loss of life and the pain and suffering of survivors, there are countless thousands of family members and friends whose lives are forever scarred. And whereas on December 14th, 2012, in our home state, 20 children and 6 adults at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut, were fatally shot in the deadliest school shooting in US history. And whereas on May 14th, 2022, 10 people were fatally shot and 3 were injured while grocery shopping in a neighborhood store near Buffalo, New York. And whereas on May 24th, 2022, 19 children and 2 adults at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, were fatally shot in the second deadliest school shooting in US history. And whereas this June 2nd marks the 21st birthday of Hadia Pendleton, a teen who tragically became a victim of gun violence. Hadia's friends chose to wear orange on her birthday because hunters wear the color of orange to protect themselves. And whereas by participating in Wear Orange activities, we stand in solidarity with the communities of Newtown, Uvalde, and dozens of other cities and towns across the nation that experienced the tragedy of senseless mass shootings. Now, therefore, we, the Madison Board of Selectmen, do hereby declare June 3rd, 2022 Gun Violence Awareness Day in Madison, and encourage residents to wear orange to call attention to the crisis of gun violence, signal our commitment to reducing gun violence in all its forms, and implore gun owners in our community to be responsible owners and properly secure any firearms in their home to prevent another senseless tragedy. So with that, any further discussion on the proclamation?
Peggy,
Well read. It was well read, Peggy. I mean, I couldn't emphasize the need for this more. I think the time is now for us to act as a Board of Selectmen and as a town. And I think this is was beautifully said.
May I just add, I was working in the General Assembly when Sandy Hook happened, and obviously it was a game changer for everyone. But those families coming up and all, I've never been involved with guns. I think maybe I've held one once, but I know I have friends that do, and they're hunters and sportsmen. But I'll tell you, we have to be proud that what Connecticut came up with. I don't know if we're still the strongest gun laws, but when I left, we were. I don't know what other states did. And one of the things that comes up is about domestic violence, and that was also addressed. And again, it passed in the House and the Senate. So I think Connecticut really has stepped up. It took an incredible, terrible event to make us all aware. And the gun safety thing just brought it all back, of course, with Ethan Song's tragic death. So I'm really glad we're doing this. And I think we all know we want responsible gun owners. That's what we have to keep striving for. But thank you for putting this together.
Thank you. I think I had the opportunity to attend a vigil on the town green on Saturday that was just to show respect and reflect on the recent shootings. And Mike Song spoke. And what was really intriguing is that Colorado just passed a similar bill to the Ethan Song bill, and Connecticut's the model. We are leading, the nation in this. And he said that, and they basically copied the bill, which it's fantastic to see something like that, to show that our state and our legislature was able to lead the charge in this and come up with something that other states want to model. So I think that should make all of us proud. And thank you, Noreen, for your service in the legislature at that time, because it's making a difference. It's hopefully will start spreading across the nation.
I'm proud to live in a state where the political process reflects the fact that the public is interested in gun safety, and the legislators have been very responsive. Noreen, I appreciate your past actions as well.
Thank you.
Any other comment from the board? And I guess we're okay with the June 3rd. I know there was a little different options, but this seemed like, since this was the national day, we decided to do June 3rd, which is Friday.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. All in favor of approving the proclamation as read, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, unanimous vote. Thank you so much. And thank you for those who brought this to my attention last week, and, you know, looking forward to continuing to make a difference in this area, very much so. So thank you. And then we'll have this posted just so people know, and we'll put it out that this is what the board approved today. So, and with that, we'll move on to item number 4, which is discuss and take action to waive the monthly rent payment from Our Lady of Mercy School of Madison for the months of April 2022 and May 2022 in the total amount of $66,666.66.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, and this is just relating to the fact that because the town had not secured the appropriate approvals through planning and zoning for some portables that were added onto the building back in, I think it was it was a long time ago, 2004, 2007 or something like that. We couldn't close on the transaction. And so it was kind of the town's fault, because we were supposed to be closing on this March 31st, but we had to go through some regulatory red tape to enable the new owners to use the portable classrooms that are attached to the school. So we felt, and we talked about this at a previous meeting, it was not really fair to charge them rent because we were the cause of the delay for the closing. And then we were hoping to close tomorrow, actually. So there'll be a closing at Town Hall at 3 o'clock with the document signing, and then more of a ceremonial closing, passing of the keys, so to speak, at Island Avenue at 3:30 tomorrow afternoon.
I think
Any further
it's
discussion?
also
Yeah.
worth adding that this has no budget impact at all. This is not money or rent that was budgeted in as revenue.
That's a great point.
So this is not a loss of $66,000 to the town. We're exactly where we expect it to be financially.
Great point, Bruce.
Yeah, and they accounted for this when they set the mill rate a few weeks ago, that this was not going to be part of the fund balance. So, okay, with that, then all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes unanimously. Thank you. And we're excited to move on tomorrow. Item number 5 is discuss and take action to approve the hiring of Christina Consiglio to the position of tax collector, salary grade 13, effective June 13th, 2022. Position is budgeted and due to retirement.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion on that? No? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Congratulations.
All right, yeah, motion passes. Great.
Mhm.
Congratulations to Christina. Item number 6, review charter draft with committee chair Joe McDougall. So, Lauren, I'm assuming Joe is not here. So he had a bit of a last minute issue pop up yesterday. He could not make this. And I think the idea here was, that we would just talk through some areas that the board feels it needs to dig deeper into, and some of the revisions of the charter. We do have some charter members of the charter committee here, though. Lauren, if you want to bring those forward. I don't know who's here. I know Joan's here, obviously. She spoke, and then
Matt is here.
Matt Gordon, Robert O'Connor.
And Bob
Okay.
O'Connor, yep.
Okay, great. I will say that I have not had time to focus heavily on this. So I spent a little time over the weekend. I want to spend a little bit more time with the red line, but I think there's some high level things perhaps that I know the board wants to have discussion on, one of those things is the role of the changes that have been made relative to the role of the Board of Finance. And then also, I think just clarity around the roles and responsibilities of the first selectman versus the Board of Selectmen. So I would think those are kind of two topics our board would probably want to dig deeper into another meeting, and get into conversations about. And I don't know if there's any other areas, just kind of high level areas in the future that board members want to focus on.
I have a couple. It would have been
Okay.
much more fun to beat Joe up with this, but I'll I'll take a stab. In the updated version, the charter now mentions the CIP, which is a relatively new invention, and has its origins in the Board of Finance. But it seems to clearly move the role of and the responsibility of CIP back over to the Board of Selectmen. And I'm wondering if that's an intentional move, or if you still see this as primarily a Board of Finance tool with participation from the Board of Selectmen. Did that come up in your discussions?
So the CIP, and I was on the Board of Selectmen and went through revision after revision when Joe was also chair of the Board of Finance when this was put into place. Because the CIP is part of the Board of Selectmen's budget and the first select person's presentation of the budget, it goes from first select person to Board of Selectmen to CIP, ultimately back to Board of Selectmen, and then the final is always Board of Finance on approvals. And that budgetary change has not, that responsibility has not changed. And CIP are members of Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen, and Board of Ed. So that's a very clear, tri-board group with members of the public appointed by each of those boards to comment or ask questions, but not be able to vote. So even though CIP was derived from the Board of Finance, it's really a full town process and flow, really driving the capital improvement program. So it doesn't really shift. I mean, the entire process has not changed. It has always originated from the first selectman's or the first selectwoman's office to present, this is my capital improvement plan. Sometimes it has gone to the Board of Selectmen first before it has gone to CIP, and other times it's gone directly to CIP.
So let me refine my question a little bit. The section 4.1.3F under general duties and responsibilities of the Board of Selectmen, that's the first mention of the CIP in the charter, and it's in its draft form that's been proposed. It's Board of Selectmen shall be responsible for developing and updating annually the 5-year capital improvement plan.
Mhm.
So that in itself doesn't conflict with anything you've just said, Joan. I guess maybe the question is more procedural. CIP is governed by a Board of Finance policy right now, right?
Correct.
So
It's a policy now that and a procedure, and that doesn't take CIP away from it. CIP has always come from the first selectman's office. It's never been, this is the Board of Finance's capital improvement program. It's always, the policy has always been, it starts with the first selectman's office and then goes from there. The request to add that in came from our director of finance. So it's very clear that it starts with the Board of Selectmen, because the Board of Selectmen is the legislative body and saying, okay, here is our plan, our long-term plan with capital improvement, with strategic, everything else, and then it's presented.
Okay. So would the
I
Board of
had a similar confusion than you did, Bruce, though, too, because I always thought that it had the ownership of CIP lived underneath the Board of Finance. And maybe that's just sort of mystical at this point, but.
I think in ideal conditions, the Board of Selectmen, led by the first, would own the capital plan. The Board of Finance through CIP proposed a process by which that work actually got done. And so
Or how to
my
finance
question
it,
is a little nuanced, is what, so for instance, can the Board of Selectmen create a CIP policy that then dictates how the capital planning is done? With the, I mean, obviously at the end, it's got to be approved by the Board of Finance.
Well, they could, if they felt as though if you guys feel as though the current policy and the current process isn't working or could be modified, you could work with the Board of Finance. Our goal in this was to have very specific lanes under Board of Finance's board versus Board of Selectmen. And if you look at CIP, the ownership of the capital improvement plan is the first selectman's office. Always has been, currently, and that is going forward. It is presented in a book. There's a letter from the person sitting in the first office, saying, here's the plan. This is what we're going to do. It gets modified through CIP with the 3 boards coming together, and then it gets approved. And the final approval and final modification to the plan does still rest on the Board of Finance. So if the Board of Finance feels as though something can and should be changed, they have the power at the very end of the voting process to be able to make those changes. Obviously, working together with the Board of Selectmen, because if you're sitting here saying, all right, here are the things we're going to do this year, and then half of them get removed by the Board of Finance, then there's got to be a shift in what the plan is for the upcoming year and that budget.
Yeah. So yes, the process has got to be collaborative.
Correct.
Absolutely, and should involve the larger, the community. So my comment is really not about the structure of the CIP committee itself, which Scott is appointed to for life. It's more of, I read the draft, and I don't see that clear call out that it originates in the office of the first. Although I agree, as the chief executive, it should, right? It talks about in 4.2.2 D, the first select person updates and presents the capital needs of the town as informed by the CIP program. So I wouldn't necessarily read that to mean that right now Peggy owns the CIP. I agree she should, right? So I'm not.
Well, the CIP program is, we got to talk about the CIP
it's a
program
living
versus
program. That's the tricky part, right?
Okay,
So it's
so
like
the
a chicken and the egg.
capital improvement program comes together as heads of departments say, this is what our needs are for capital improvement. And that is under, currently under Peggy. It's like all it, and it always has been. I think we're confusing the program with the policies around it. The program is, the capital improvement program is a book. It shows all the reserves for all the fire trucks and the ambulances and things like that. And then it also has some things that are in the non-recurring or non-capital improvements, the one-time hits, the things that we're also going to go out to bond for potentially. The school was in there for a couple of years, the new school. Changes to academy is in there. It's not that those are presented always as a group, just like the budget is initially presented, even though the budget is ultimately finally approved by the Board of Finance, it originates from the first office.
Well, I sort of talked over you. Sorry, John. But to me, the CIP is a living and breathing plan. It's a 5-year plan. That's the intention of it. And it continues to evolve every single year. So while the senior staff is contributing in on a yearly basis, the plan itself, to your point, is in existence and lives, not just on a shelf, but hopefully, out in all the departments, and they're looking at it every single day.
Right.
So
And
I think to the selectmen, I think we probably want to take time to read the 2 mentions of the CIP in the charter and make sure that we're clear about.
I completely agree, Bruce. I think it's a great call out. Yeah, I think it's a great call out.
Yeah, I will review it again. I mean, I know what process I've had because I meet with all the staff. I change timelines. I work with the staff. We're actually trying to go to a 10-year plan now. So, it kind of changes the whole conversation with them, because it's like, it's not either in CIP or not in CIP, because now we have a 10-year plan. But I will focus on this. And then obviously I come to you guys, we've had a meeting or two usually on CIP prior to the final transmittal that I give to the committee. So I will spend a little bit more time on that.
Peggy,
that's
I'd
a
like to
shout out.
follow up your comment and Bruce's. You just mentioned that we're beginning to think about 10 years, not 5 years. And I'm wondering if the charter shouldn't be a little less specific. In the charter, it's listing a 5-year plan. And certainly of late, the Board of Selectmen is looking out way beyond 5 years.
Mhm.
So one of the minor edits I was going to suggest is that we remove the word 5-year or have something longer. And I was wondering whether the Charter Review Committee had considered that.
We hadn't, but I think one of the things we want to think about is you want to say maybe a minimum of 5 years, because you want to think, okay, maybe 15, 20 years down the road, somebody goes, oh, we don't need 10 years. We only going to do it year by year. And there are towns that literally bond every year for the things they need for that year. And that's not a long-term thinking. I think we want to make sure that it either notes a long-term in there or something that, that presents that this program exists for the planning of the long-term.
Well, and I guess I think Al, yeah, maybe saying long-term capital improvement program, but I look at the CIP is the financing piece, and I look at a 10-year plan as the project planning piece, right? Because it's kind of a crystal ball trying to figure out how we're going to pay for this stuff over the next 5 years, and so you have that discipline. But then beyond 5 years, it's more, we want to make sure projects don't fall off the radar, and that we're accounting for things appropriately and prioritizing every year. So pulling things into the capital plan when maybe a matching grant comes up all of a sudden. And so we want to pull it from year 6 into year 3, perhaps, because the financing's there. So I guess I always looked at CIP as more of a financing plan. Mm-hmm. But these are all good discussion points, I think, because we want to make sure it's clear whoever's sitting here, gets what the objectives are for this, right?
Right. And I think, Peggy, it's worth adding that and this is a bit of a rabbit hole, but the CIP committee is a recommending committee. The Board of Selectmen are free to take those types of one-off events and move things around in its final recommendation back to the Board of Finance. So the CIP committee is not etching anything in stone. They're informing the capital work that's already been done. And come from the first and from the Board of Selectmen to them. So I think we've got room in the existing policies. So, okay, so that was one thing. I can hold my second question.
I think Matt had a comment. Sorry.
Oh no, my only comment was same as Joan. I mean, we can just go to capital improvement plan, minimum of 5 years, because we did not know about the 10-year situation. But that's in line with a lot of the language that we did. The changing that we did before was just to simplify it and make it non-anchored to any specific thing, so that again, you can change it as you go forward. But yeah, that's a simple change.
Perfect.
Okay, so we have CIP. I think we've already talked about role for selectmen and then role of Board of Finance are kind of 3 areas we wanted all of us focus on and have a deeper dive in. Is there anything else that, Bruce, you seem to have a little list going that you want us to talk about?
Very short list.
Yeah.
But I don't need to go. If somebody else has a question,
yeah.
Okay. So in the sections that talk about the Board of Selectmen in the office of the first, I think we need to consider the relative responsibilities. I'm worried that it's been reorganized a little bit in this revision, and I think it will lend itself to clarity, but 4.1.4 A, which speaks to employment, as a power of the Board of Selectmen. I want to make sure that that's in harmony with the powers that we're affording the first select person in 4.2. So I'm not debating or arguing or anything. I just want to make sure that we're testing the two clauses against each other, make sure that we're not creating friction. D in 4.2.1 establishes a very clear authority in the office of the first for organizational structure, reporting relationships, scope of responsibilities of town employees. And I don't want that to bleed back into the employment powers of the Board of Selectmen.
I think the term conditions of employment are very vague and broad. And so I think.
And maybe that's where my
Yeah.
concern arrives. I
Yeah.
can, I think we're all free to interpret that however we want. And then there's the friction.
So I think our interpretation thought, I don't think that was modified too much, to tell you, from the prior charter, was exactly what you guys did today. You approved the hiring at a certain level of a new tax collector. So that was the thought process, is that the Board of Selectmen is still going to be approving all hires. And, any kind of, dismissals as well. Obviously, resignations are one thing, but if there is a dismissal or a firing, which happened when I was on the board and you're an executive committee and you're talking about these things, it is a Board of Selectmen conversation, not a firsts. The first brings it to the table and then the board talks it through.
I would agree with that.
And I think the conditions, that's where, though, I think conditions of employment, that term, I think needs to be thought through a little bit more. I think there's a legal element of that also, if you're looking at labor law. So we need to just, I'm not ready to have that conversation today, but I think we need to understand more what that means and how that involves workplace, right? And I think, the hiring and firing is clear. I will point out that a lot of other towns don't have that at the Board of Selectmen level. It's the first selectman that is involved has complete hiring and termination powers. But our board does call that out as something that the entire board weighs into. But I think the conditions of employment piece, and that would be a good discussion with our town council as well, what that means.
Yeah, and I think the conversation that we can have as a board is, do we want to make sure that we're clearly establishing that role for the first, and the board is simply that sort of checkbox step of approving, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose we could spontaneously say no, but I'm not sure what events would have to do that. Or we establish a real check and balance, right? So I'm not advocating for one or the other. I'm just saying that right now I'm worried they're a little muddled with that language. And Peggy, I think you're right to observe that it's that conditions of employment that is the opportunity for confusion.
So that's one mark for, future discussion about that.
Yeah, and you're right. I think Carrie can inform the discussion.
Yeah, I agree.
As the newest member of this group, and I've been away from town politics for a decade, and that was the biggest surprise to me, how unclear that is. I'm not in the charter as much as within this board. And that's why I've really been, as you know, pushing for just a clarification with the town attorney. And I do know that in the past, there's been conversations of, and Peggy brought up what other towns are doing, to not allow hiring and firing conditions of employment to be up to one person. And that was something that was really pushed. And I know I had conversations years ago with that, about that whole thing. And I think we've got to be aware of what we want this to look like. But I think working together to clarify it would really be helpful to me. I do feel sometimes we don't have enough, without clarification, it's hard to do our job as the Board of Selectmen, not for Peggy.
No, I agree. And I think that's one we'll certainly have a good, solid conversation and weigh in.
If we're still on the Board of Finance, I'm sorry, Bruce, are you finished?
Well, it
He's got a
depends.
list.
I think he's got 50 more items.
Oh, I'm
No,
sorry.
that was it. I mean, I've
Oh.
got other parts that I'm reading through, and I'm just sort of testing them in my mind with different scenarios. But no, Al, go ahead.
Okay, I have three minor questions regarding the Board of Finance. Page 10 of section I has to do with settlement of legal awards. And philosophically, I'm very interested in, especially from those members of the Charter Review Commission who have not served an elective office, I'm very interested in whether or not it is a good idea to require that the Board of Finance, in effect, sign off on legal awards. There can be situations in which the Board of Selectmen has reached a very delicate decision about a legal award. And I'm not quite sure why the selectmen need a check and balance to also have the Board of Finance get involved in something which by charter really seems to fall within the selectmen's domain. So I'm interested philosophically whether we should continue to have that in the charter.
Well, and to build upon that, just the realities, Al, of whether or not the Board of Finance would ever change the award that the Board of Selectmen has come up with. So it almost seems like it's, a rubber stamp.
Yeah.
We should add in for everybody watching, we're not writing checks to people carte blanche here. This is not an everyday occurrence.
No.
Well, I'm trying to pick on Matt and Bob O'Connor here because Joan, I know you're familiar with the issue, but philosophically, I was wondering whether there was a fresh take on this. So that's my first of three questions with the Board of Finance.
I think it's a great point, Al.
I'll take a stab. So again, not having any history or any experience with town politics before this, the thought that I had, and I can't represent the whole group, but if there is going to be a check going out, somebody has to finance that. And so there has to be, from the group that does the financing, they're going to have a part in that. Are we able to do it? Are the selectmen going rogue in the sense of agreeing to do something, to pay something out, but we don't have the financing for it? So that's why we left it in. But the way that you're posing the question, especially with sensitivities around that, I can definitely see your point that there might be something that should be done, but also shouldn't be. I'm not advocating for not having transparency, but I can understand some legal sensitivities that could be around something. That was the original thought.
Matt, you raise a sort of an interesting wording there too. I wonder if there's a way to phrase it in such a way that it focuses the Board of Finance on the source of funds or how we pay for it, as opposed to necessarily validating the decision that was made by the Board of Selectmen, thus giving the lanes, right?
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
When we were discussing this, and I hope hopefully you remember, Joe and I were telling a story about the Board of Selectmen putting a number in for a baseball field. It was the field at the town campus, and when I went to the Board of Finance, and the first selectman had definitely undervalued what it was going to cost. And it went to the Board of Finance, and the Board of Finance made the decision. Al, you might have been on the board then, made the decision to change the dollar amount. So they were able to change what the recommendation was from the first selectman.
That was a fun one.
Yeah, I think Al's bigger point is taken. What if we run into a situation where we have a settlement that needs to happen? It's the right settlement to happen, and the Board of Finance were to exercise their prerogative and say no. Where does that leave us?
Oh, and I think it creates, having just been through this, I'm required, if you do a settlement agreement, a legal settlement agreement that is through an arbitrator, and then I'm presented as the person with authority, you have to make this agreement, and then, have to then go through two boards after that, is tough. I think we've removed the town meeting requirement, correct? So for anything related to, it is hard because, you're you put the burden of finding the settlement in the power of the first selectman's office, but with no authority to actually complete what we have represented to. I mean, we have conditions of approval as part of the settlement. So I guess in that sense, I never signed anything without the conditions that it needed Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance approval.
Right. And just for context, Peggy, you might know this, Lauren probably does know it. When we have claims against us, the insurance caps us at a certain level, right?
Mhm.
So,
Yes, it depends on the type of claim too.
Yeah.
So
Does Bob-
without
Bob-
getting
you guys-
into executive session,
Yeah.
there have been
You-
claims.
I
You
think
guys
Bob's
asked
trying to get-
for someone with the non-political, not understanding much about Madison. It seems to me there's always trade-offs. You can always say, well, why don't we have a check and balance and another check and balance on the check and balance? And philosophically, that sounds cool. But wait a second, you can get wrapped around the axle. So it seems to me, and this is a lanes issue. So philosophically, with a legal settlement, it seems to me the board should be the ones deciding that
Mhm.
with freedom.
The Board of
Right.
Select, the Board of Finance, the Board of Selectmen, you mean, Bob?
The Board of Selectmen, right?
Yeah.
And I think that this may be a straggler that's been left from the prior charter. I've never been in a situation where the Board of Finance said no. However, I think Matt brought up a good point. If you've got somebody who's gone off the rails and, maybe there's, we're thinking about the positive and the possible negatives as well every time we're trying to review this language. If somebody goes for, all right, we're going to give out 20 billion in settlement, and it's, and $1 million of it's covered by insurance, and we're going to be in debt for, the next 100 years to this entity. I think that there's a way to word it where the funding would be approved, how the funding happens, or because it is an impact on the budget. And that's one of the things, any kind of drawdown that's unanticipated is going to impact future budgets. So that was one of the reasons I think it was kept in there. But you guys, I think the conversation could be had by bringing in the Board of Finance folks and say, what are your thoughts on this? Are you guys just rubber stamping everything we're doing?
I didn't mean we should try to solve this morning. I was just really trying to raise this as something I wanted to see if you had already considered it. Peggy, I didn't mean to tie up the meeting this morning. I have a couple.
No, it's a good conversation because I think we were all kind of gravitating towards different things based on our experiences with the charter, right? We've been living it. All of you actually have lived it longer than I have. And then Al has actually sat in my seat as well. So it's kind of see what you gravitate towards where you've had issues or problems or, hurdles that have been problematic. And you want to make sure this charter addresses them with clarity. So maybe with that, and this is on, I'm keeping a list. I'm sure Lauren's keeping a list. Bruce, I know you had others on your list.
no, actually, I
Okay.
got my two things out.
Okay.
I think that they're bigger discussions, but those were the two
exactly.
things.
Okay.
Well,
Marie, did you have something?
Yeah, I did, it's terms of the Board of Selectmen and First Selectmen being
Okay.
changed for. I was just opposed. I was there when some of the conversation, I wasn't there the final day when it was decided which way to go, but I know one of the drivers was staff wanting, well, you know what, I'm not gonna say, we've got charter members here that can explain why they think that's so important.
Why the lanes
What?
are,
Changing the terms from 2 to 4 years. Terms of office, to make the Board of Selectmen like the other boards.
right. So first of all, we researched some other towns, and saw that it was much more effective when the Board of Selectmen went to 4 years. There's a continuity piece that the staff will then be able to have continuity for 4 years. And also, it really, you're in for 2 years, you're just getting your feet under you, and you're going back again out for the reelection. And I think that that's very hard for people who are volunteering in these roles.
Hear, hear.
So, I think for the most part, it was fairly almost unanimous as far as the people who came to us and felt that 4 years was the right number of years. But it was also something that we said should be a breakout question so that ultimately the people of Madison decide. But, we felt very strongly that the continuity, the review and, really heard the staff at that point too.
So one of the things that we had the luxury of doing is spending a lot of time debating this among ourselves and looking at a lot of issues together. One of the issues that we looked at together was some of the thought from people in the town about a town manager, which we decided not to do in this charter as a suggestion to the board. However, why have a town manager? And it's the continuity that Joan's just speaking of. So that was one of the things to go into increasing the terms for the Board of Selectmen. And I have to say, as Noreen's alluding to, that our team was very heterogeneous in their thoughts about this, but at the end of the day, decided to put that forward to you as for your thoughts. But again, it's for that continuity, especially with town employees and the work with that. Now, again, we have to realize too that in the best of situation, that's wonderful. If the board is not the right board, then you just bought an extra 2 years. That's the trade-off. But that's what we thought going forward was better continuity.
Bob, you got anything?
No, nothing really, except that, the thought somehow that that there's an electorate out there that's sharp, that most Madisonians are closely watching what the board is doing and paying close attention. So will every 2 years, have the cognitive capability to be wisely assessing what the hell's going on and who's doing what. It's not as realistic, where if you have 4 years, you may have sharper attention on candidates and their performance if they're running for re-election, or their platforms if they're new. So it's not an effort to make the board less responsible to the citizenry, if anything, to make them more responsible. But these are very debatable topics. It's not, the angels are all on one side.
Yeah, I know. Thanks. I was, no one, as Scott's been nodding his head, no one loves the fact that you have to run for office every 2 years.
Yeah.
But as a board member, it's not as big a deal because obviously we don't run like a big campaign or whatever. But I do worry about the Board of Selectmen with the first selectmen are the different than other boards. They set the priorities, they set the programs for the town. And if we put somebody in that's not working, they're elected. It's not like we can say it's not working. We're not going to continue this. That doesn't happen. It's a decision made every 2 years. And I understand the continuity thing, definitely. But I feel there's another side to it that it's hard sometimes to do things in 2 years, but you can do a lot of damage in 2 years too. So I know we'll have a future discussion on this, but I'm really happy that you did it as a breakout piece.
I have a handful of items to put on the list. I don't necessarily feel we need to discuss them this morning, but I want to make sure they do get attention at some point. I'm looking at section 4.4 on page 13. It refers to the pension committee. I have been the chair of that pension committee, I believe, for more than a decade, maybe a dozen years now. for those of you that aren't familiar with it, it is actually an investment committee. And my question to you as a charter review commission is, why is it a selectman that's being asked to chair that as opposed to a board of finance member being asked
Good question.
to chair that? I'm sure in the wisdom of our forebears, they had a very good reason for doing that. I'm not sure I understand it anymore. And so without starting a discussion this morning, I would just ask you to rethink why it's a selectman that is chairing the investment committee as opposed to a board of finance member. And Noreen, I believe you were a chair at one point yourself, weren't you?
So the thought process behind that particular committee is that it is a policy committee, and policies are derived from the Board of Selectmen as far as, you know.
Joan, it's a policy committee, I believe, only to the extent of setting investment policy. It is technically not a pension committee. It is really an investment committee, unless you, the charter people, want to define it differently. But I inherited this. I believe my predecessor was Joe McDougall, who was chair. And so at least for the last 15 or 20 years, this committee has served as an investment committee, not truly as Joan is suggesting. You're right, Joan. If it were a pension committee, it would be setting policy. This is really, at least in its current iteration, an investment committee. So again, I didn't mean to start a discussion this morning. I would just like some more clarity on that. My final item to put on the list, I'm looking at section 10.3, which has to do with dispersal of funds. And I was thinking about, how do we handle government grants? Is that governed by this section 10.3? For example, we currently have millions of dollars of ARPA money, which we are going to be distributing. And it wasn't clear to me whether this section 10.3 would apply to that. And again, I don't mean to have a discussion on that this morning. I just didn't want us to get hung up on this.
No, that's it's a fair thought. A lot has gone on with the grants that we've received, and so I'll note that to look at it, and we'll think about that. Any other, because we're going to have opportunity. I just want to make sure we got a good list to put together here and for the next meeting. Any other areas? I know that there was a lot of changes about thresholds, so just carefully read through those thresholds and the wording around it. I think also the timelines for the budget referendums. It looks like now we would probably be moving to a May schedule. But that's something I think we just want to make sure we're comfortable with. I think the flexibility is important because we have a very rigid time frame.
We tried to make it less rigid. That was the goal. And we removed one notification in the paper because it's not required by law. It's only one notification rather than two. So that kind of drove a lot of the timelines when we heard from staff on how the whole presentation and things like that. So hopefully this gives more flexibility, not less flexibility in timing of the budget.
And then,
sorry, I have one more item just to put on the list. 5.1A, what some of us call the bumping rule, having to do with the first selectman candidate that gets the lesser vote tally. I was wondering whether the Charter Review Commission had a look at that and whether that still makes sense. And I, among others, are also perplexed about a second possibility. Is it possible to have a minority first selectman? And would that be good for the town? And Joan, I know you're very expert on this, and I get very confused about it. I'm just wondering whether the Charter Review Commission spent any time on it.
We did. And we went back and forth quite a bit. And the thought process is the voters have spoken, the top 5 vote getters, whether that means a minority or a majority, or someone sitting in the office is no longer the first and now on the board, we felt that the top 5 vote getters should continue to, because that's what the people have voted. So we stuck with that thought process.
Another thing I'll just ask is the compensation of selectmen. And you noted that it would be the commencement of the effective term, but if you're going to 4 years, that creates a huge problem in terms of falling further and further behind. Already the first selectman's compensation is, not necessarily appropriate considering a town manager, role, which you're really playing, but then, so just a thought we can talk about later is somehow having where the Board of Finance would award something just so you don't get so far behind, because we got really behind for a long time.
So there was language that originally got, I don't know why it got modified, and I'm not sure if I was there, but it was, there is a language of art that'll say prior to the next term or 2 years in, if it's a 4-year term. So the thing is, we couldn't do the or 2 years in, because until you get to 4 years, then that can't be in there. So maybe those two are combined together as a question, which then allows for, so it's like prior to the term and at midterm, and then that's it. You can't be bumping every year. And I think there's some good language in the state regulations on that.
Okay. Well, how about this is a good list, obviously. And I appreciate our committee members coming, because it's good to know what you debated about and your rationale, so I'm sure we'll have you back again on some of these topics to get your thoughts again. I think because of the timeline here, and I printed this out, we need to have a public hearing by the 27th. And so I think we should have another meeting, our meeting, to go through discussion. The public hearing does not have to have any changes or anything, right, for that meeting, correct? We'll call that, and we can call that at our meeting on the 14th, because that only requires a normal notice period, correct,
You
Lauren?
already called it at your meeting of the 23rd. It's already
Oh, that's
been
right.
posted. So it's 6
That's
p.m.
right.
on Monday,
Yeah.
June 27th.
Okay. That's right. We did do that,
Yep.
didn't we? Because we decided to go with the timeline. So I see you got okay. So with that, we still should probably work to have a follow-up discussion, possibly next week, just focused on charter. So we will look to organize that. And then have the agenda items be maybe these specific areas, and then we can always come back. I'm also thinking, board members, if you have little things, could we just email some of those to the committee, and then they could provide us some thoughts, some more not nits and gnats, but, not big high level discussion topics, but some smaller things. We could put like a questionnaire together rather than tying up the whole meeting discussion on some of those. And maybe Lauren can consolidate those questions and turn them over to the charter committee. Because I have to go through this more. I want to go through the markup again and just really get my arms around it. It's a lot, obviously. You guys have done a tremendous amount of work, and we're really grateful for that. I think it's so much clearer now when you read these things. It's just it reads better, and it brings a lot more clarity. So why don't we do that? We'll plan on doing a meeting perhaps next week, a Zoom meeting. Or is it Joe is away next week, Lauren? There was some scheduling issues, right?
Joe is gone through the 10th.
To the 10th. Okay.
Professors.
Okay, so it would have to be the week of the 13th. I don't think we want to do it on a regular meeting.
Although I think as a board, we can always get together and talk through our thoughts.
Yeah.
And then where we need to reach out for clarification or thinking, we always invite the committee members to it, so they're available. But I think a lot of these conversations are amongst ourselves. How do we want this to move forward?
So try to go for next week.
And yeah, and if we have any edits to send back to the commission, then obviously we would do that in its point in the process.
Right. All right, that's good. Well, I'm happy with that. I mean, this was very helpful, and to have you guys here, and maybe we just target to do this next week then. Keep
Peggy,
it moving, 'cause-
May I add just one thing? So just to go on the record, this was a wonderful commission to work with. It really was a lot of fun. It was a great team that came together. We had a lot of great discussions, and hats off to Lauren for really tying everything together. She was the one that kept us on track and honest. And so thank you, Lauren.
I would add Joe's work was outstanding. Really.
Yes, yes.
He listens.
Yep.
We worked well
Couldn't agree
together.
more. Yes, it was a very well-run group.
All right, well, good. And clearly, because of the work product, it shows that, you guys did a great job and worked well together. So, all right, with that, then I think can I get a motion to adjourn?
Moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you guys, to be
Thank you.
continued. All right, have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.